Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Cameron Whitaker has always been the kind of man who believed that hard work, honesty, and dedication were the pillars of anything in life. These values transformed him into one of the most respected architects in the region. The company he built didn't just carry his name but also his essence, his history, every detail thought out, every project delivered with excellence. By his side for years was Patrick, a friend who became a partner and whom, for a long time, Cameron believed was almost like a brother. And, of course, Madison, his wife, who, in addition to being his life partner, was also one of the company's investors, holding 30% of the shares. In the eyes of anyone, Cameron had a perfect life. A solid career, a prestigious company, a marriage that seemed stable, a comfortable and calm routine. He was the kind of man who looked back with pride and believed that if he continued on this path, he would have an even better future. Until that day. A day that started like any other, without warning, without a sign, without any intuition that something was about to change forever. While checking some routine emails, a message caught his attention. The sender was unknown, there was no subject, just an attached file and a brief phrase, "You need to see this before it's too late." That alone caused a strange chill in his stomach, but nothing prepared him for what he was about to watch. When he opened the video, Cameron needed a few seconds to understand what he was seeing. At first, the images seemed to be recorded from a hidden cell phone, perhaps behind some object, maybe propped up on a shelf somewhere. But within seconds, shock took over him. Madison. His wife. Sitting comfortably, laughing. And next to her, Patrick, his partner, smiling the same way, but not as a partner, nor as a friend, but as someone intimately involved with her. The video didn't just show caresses, touches, or smiles that crossed any limit of friendship. It also showed a conversation that, if it hadn't been recorded, Cameron would never have believed was real. He clearly heard Patrick talking about how close they were to putting the plan into action. They discussed details of how they would remove him from the company, how they could legally pressure him, how they would use clauses from the company's bylaws to force Cameron to give up his stake. Madison agreed, added details, gave suggestions, as if all of this were just another negotiation, without any weight, without any respect for everything they had built together. Every sentence felt like a stab. The mocking tone, the way they laughed, the casualness with which they treated the subject, as if it were the simplest thing in the world, as if destroying Cameron's life was just a move on a board game. In that moment, all the trust, all the love, all the history they had built seemed to collapse. It was as if every memory, every achievement, every day lived with those people lost all meaning. Cameron felt his breathing quicken. For a few seconds, he tried to believe that maybe it was some kind of misunderstanding, a setup, a manipulation. But the video was clear, the voices were unmistakable, the faces, the expressions, everything was there. And along with the images came the memory of small signs that, until then, he had ignored. Trips that didn't make much sense, meetings that ended too late, messages she quickly deleted, looks exchanged between Madison and Patrick that, at the time, he swore were just in his head. But now everything made sense. The pieces fit together in a cruel way. Worst of all, beyond the personal betrayal, what hurt the most was realizing that this was a planned hit, cold and calculated. They weren't just together behind his back. They wanted to destroy him. They wanted to take away from him what he had spent decades building, the company that carried his name, his reputation, his legacy. The first reaction might have been to scream, break things, run to them and demand answers. But no. Cameron had always been a rational man. He took a deep breath, even though his hands were shaking, and understood that if they were playing dirty, he would need to be even smarter. As the initial shock gave way to the coldness of reason, Cameron knew time was against him. The divorce needed to be quick and strategic, as did any decision involving the company. His first call was to his lawyer, who remained silent for a few seconds, surprised by what he was hearing. But it didn't take long for him to understand the gravity of what was happening. They spent hours aligning each step. First, they immediately froze all joint accounts. Bank passwords were changed, cards blocked. Anything that could prevent Madison from draining money before the process began was done. The lawyer also filed a formal divorce petition that same day, requesting protective measures for assets. Every document was filed urgently, and everything was carefully coordinated so she couldn't hide assets, sell properties, or move funds before the court intervened. Cameron didn't even consider going home. As soon as he left that meeting, he went straight to one of the apartments they owned near the company, a property they occasionally used to rest after longer workdays. At that moment, that place became his temporary refuge, not by choice but by necessity. The mere idea of crossing the door of his house, looking at that environment filled with lies, knowing that every piece of furniture, every painting, every shared space was tainted by betrayal, was unbearable. He needed distance, silence, and above all, clarity to understand how all of this had happened and, most importantly, what he would do from there. Cameron's phone exploded with calls and messages from Madison when she realized something was wrong. At first came the lighter messages, pretending to be surprised. "What's going on? Where are you? Why did you block everything?" Then, the messages became more aggressive, full of empty accusations, as if she were trying to reverse the roles. But Cameron didn't respond to any of them. Each message was screenshotted, saved, organized as evidence. He knew that from then on, any word spoken could be used against him. Patrick, on the other hand, reacted differently. He pretended indifference. He sent only a formal email, cold, as if this were just a bureaucratic matter. The kind of email that says much more between the lines than in the words themselves. He knew the situation went beyond Cameron's personal life. It was a strategic move, involving money, power, and, above all, control of the company. The first meeting with the lawyers was tense. Madison kept a forced smile on her face the entire time, as if still trying to convey the image that all of this was just a misunderstanding. But it only took Cameron's lawyer presenting the evidence, screenshots of conversations, videos, audio, for that smile to disappear almost instantly. She crossed her arms, fell silent, and what followed was a display of cynicism. "If you think you're leaving me with nothing, you're very mistaken," she snapped, looking directly at Cameron. Patrick was there, arms crossed, without even looking at him. He knew things had gone too far, but he was already so committed to the plan that there was no turning back. The divorce process, although painful, moved faster than usual because, unlike what Madison imagined, Cameron wasn't there to negotiate. He wanted to cut ties with her as objectively as possible. If she wanted money, he'd give it. If she wanted assets, he'd let them go. What he wanted was distance, peace, freedom. And above all, to protect what was left of his dignity. When the topic shifted from personal to professional, the tension increased. Patrick, now Madison's formal ally, brought up the company's bylaws. A document Cameron had signed years earlier, never imagining it could one day be used against him. It was all there, black and white. The clauses were direct and objective. If two or more partners, who together represented the majority of the company, decided to buy out another partner's share, they had that right guaranteed. All it took was for the offer to be formalized and evaluated according to market criteria. Cameron held 40%, but Madison, with 30%, and Patrick, with another 30%, together formed 60%, enough to legally force him to sell his stake. It was a clause originally intended as protection against partnership conflicts, never imagining it would be used in such a dirty and cruel way. And it wasn't a friendly negotiation. It was declared pressure, constant, an emotional massacre disguised as legal formality. Madison, with a mocking tone, even said during the negotiation meeting, "You can leave with your head held high, Cameron. After all, we're paying you well. It's not that bad." Patrick didn't say a word, just observed, as if he were about to win the game of his life. Signing that contract was, without a doubt, the most humiliating moment Cameron had ever experienced. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from anger, indignation, a pain that didn't fit in his chest. It was as if every letter of that paper were a stab to his history, a scar that would never fade. For 20 years, he had poured his soul into that company. Every project, every client, every sleepless night working. And in a matter of weeks, he was being ripped away from it all. Leaving that room, the silence was deafening. No words, no looks. Just the cold realization that, from that point on, his life would never be the same. And as broken as he was inside, something within him ignited. A spark. An inner voice that said, with a strength he had never felt before, "They think they've won. They think they've knocked me down. But this is just the beginning." Cameron spent days practically isolated in that apartment. Not wanting contact with anyone, he locked himself there, processing everything, reliving every detail, every conversation, every look that now made complete sense. The memories came like stabs in his mind. But while they believed Cameron was destroyed, he was actually planning something much bigger. On that first night, he opened his laptop and started writing names. Specialized corporate lawyers, financial experts, independent auditors, and even private investigators. It wasn't just about recovering something. It was about destroying those who tried to destroy him. He knew that Madison and Patrick were greedy, but they were also reckless. Neither of them truly understood how to run a company of that size. Their vision was limited, focused solely on easy money. And Cameron knew every detail of the operation, every loophole, every vulnerable point. If there was a way to bring them down, it was by watching them hang themselves with their own traps. He hired a discreet but extremely efficient auditing firm. And he gave them one instruction: dig up everything. Every bank transaction, every signed contract, every deal, every email, every file. In parallel, he put 2 private investigators to closely monitor their every move, inside and outside the company. The goal was simple: find anything that could be used against them at the right moment. Meanwhile, as Cameron had predicted, chaos began to settle into the company. Within a few months, problems started to appear. Clients began complaining about the quality of the projects. Late deliveries, gross errors, budgets exceeding estimates on works that, until recently, ran like clockwork. The reason? Madison and Patrick had no idea what they were doing. They made decisions without planning, cut costs where they shouldn't, fired essential professionals, and hired unqualified people simply because they were cheaper. And the mistakes weren't limited to operations. They began embezzling money from the company, simulated ghost consultancy contracts, issued fake invoices, and inflated construction costs. The greed, which was already enormous, grew even more when they noticed revenue was falling. Instead of fixing things, they started siphoning off whatever they could before it completely sank. Employees began to notice something was wrong. Many of the old collaborators, who stayed with the company after Cameron's departure, started resigning. Some for ethical reasons, others out of fear of getting involved in bigger problems. Backstage conversations began to spread, and quickly the company's once impeccable reputation began to crumble. Suppliers started cutting credit. Banks began refusing loans. And longtime clients, who blindly trusted Cameron's name, simply broke contracts. Meanwhile, Cameron watched it all from the sidelines, with a coldness even he didn't know he possessed. And more than just watching, he archived everything. Every wrong move. Every new debt. Every employee who left dissatisfied. Every supplier who cut ties. Every client who sued the company. Everything was evidence. Everything was ammunition. The height of Madison and Patrick's desperation came when they realized the ship was, indeed, sinking. That's when they began desperately seeking investors. They knocked on the doors of investment funds, international banks, construction companies, and even former competitors, offering partial or total sale of the company. But no one was interested. Everyone knew the business was contaminated, wrapped in rumors of mismanagement, fraud, and scandals. It was then that, like a light at the end of the tunnel for them, an unexpected offer emerged. An international holding company, specialized in business recovery, expressed interest in buying 100% of the company, assuming the debts and saving what was left. The price, of course, was much lower than it would have been if the company were healthy. But, in their desperation, it seemed like the only option. Madison and Patrick breathed a sigh of relief, thinking they had finally found a way out. They ignored the details and clung to the offer as if it were a lifeboat. They scheduled the meeting to sign the contracts, eager to get rid of the ticking time bomb. On the day of the meeting, they entered the room smiling. But when they looked at the table, they were completely paralyzed. Cameron was there. Sitting. In a suit. With a cold, impassive, almost cruel gaze. Next to him were lawyers, experts, and representatives of the holding company. Cameron didn't respond immediately. He simply pulled out a leather folder, placed it on the table, opened it slowly, and began spreading the documents, one by one, meticulously. Each sheet represented a bomb. Screenshots of conversations, emails exchanged with suppliers coordinating cost inflation, bank statements with transfers to personal accounts, fake consultancy contracts, fake invoices, and detailed records of financial transactions incompatible with any legal practice. Everything was perfectly organized, with dates, amounts, names, GPS printouts showing suspicious movements, call recordings, audio files, a true web of crimes. The silence in the room was deafening. The only sound was the rustling of papers being spread across the table. Madison clenched her own hands, trying to hide her nervousness, but her gaze already betrayed panic. Patrick, who always maintained an arrogant demeanor, now stared at the papers as if looking at his own death sentence. When he finished laying everything out, Cameron stood up, placed both hands on the table, looked into their eyes, and spoke with the firmest, sharpest voice they had ever heard. "I knew you'd implode what I built. I just had to watch you sink yourselves, because your greed did all the work for me." For a few seconds, no one could react. Madison tried to regain control, mumbling something about filing a lawsuit, that this was abuse, that he couldn't be there. But the lawyer accompanying Cameron was quick, pulled another document from her bag, and dropped it on the table. "This is a complete dossier. I can send it to the prosecutor's office and the Specialized Financial Crimes Division at any moment. If you want, you can open it right now and take a look at what you're being accused of," she said, with the coldness of someone who knows they hold all the cards. Patrick completely lost his composure. "You set us up?" he asked, slamming the table, sweating, breathing heavily, as if he might faint at any moment. Cameron crossed his arms and replied, without changing his tone, "Me? No. You set yourselves up. I just documented it." Madison put her hand to her head, closed her eyes, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare, but it was very real. She still tried to argue, saying that this didn't change the fact that the company was bankrupt, that he might be laughing now, but the problem was still his. And it was at that moment that the final blow came. Cameron took a deep breath, leaned closer, looked directly into her eyes, and replied, "I didn't buy the company to save it. I bought it to restore my name to it. And whatever's left, I'll rebuild. Without you. And without the scars of the dirt you left behind." The contract was there, on the table. Madison and Patrick quickly understood that if they signed, they would avoid jail, at least for now. The agreement was clear: they would sell their entire stake for a symbolic amount, far below what it was worth at one point, in exchange for Cameron not filing criminal charges against them at that moment. But for that, they would also have to sign a formal confession, taking responsibility for all the embezzlements, frauds, and crimes committed during their time at the company. Minutes of tension passed. Patrick, sweating profusely, signed first. He was fully aware that if he refused, he'd walk out of there in handcuffs. Madison still tried to resist, held the pen, stared at Cameron with a look mixing hatred, shame, and humiliation, but deep down, she knew there was no way out. She signed. She scribbled her name shakily on the papers, swallowing the bitter taste of loss. As soon as the last signature was placed, Cameron gathered all the documents, put them back in the folder, and without saying another word, stood up and left the room. The dry sound of the door closing was, without a doubt, more humiliating than any shout, any argument, any declared revenge. It was the sound of the end. But not the end for Cameron. It was the end for them. Because those who tried to destroy ultimately ended up destroyed by their own ambition. After regaining control of the company, Cameron embarked on a task few would have the courage to face. He created an emergency recovery plan, restructured departments, brought back former employees, those who had been fundamental in building the company's reputation, and with them, restored not only the operation but also the trust of clients and suppliers. In the first few months, the focus was on cleaning up the tarnished image, renegotiating contracts, and presenting the market with a new cycle, free from the dirt, mismanagement, and scandals that Madison and Patrick had left behind. At the same time that he was rebuilding his company, Cameron took the entire dossier he had gathered, with robust and detailed evidence, directly to the relevant authorities. He formally filed complaints with the IRS, the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, responsible for regulating businesses and commercial practices, and the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. The accusations were serious and indisputable: tax fraud, money laundering, forgery, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit corporate crimes. Federal authorities launched criminal and civil investigations, and the case quickly turned into a high-impact process. In the months that followed, Cameron's name began circulating again in the market, but now with even greater respect. Clients who had distanced themselves began seeking his services again, trusting not only in the quality of his work but also in the strength of character he demonstrated amid the biggest crisis of his life. Former partners, suppliers, and top-level professionals insisted on returning, taking key positions in the restructuring process. The market recognized that if Cameron could face something so destructive and come out standing, he deserved not only recognition but also new opportunities. What seemed like the end turned into the greatest rebirth of his career. The company's reputation was fully restored, with features in specialized magazines, invitations to speak, and public acknowledgement. Meanwhile, Madison and Patrick face ongoing criminal proceedings, with a real risk of federal conviction, in addition to multi-million-dollar civil lawsuits for damages caused. Looking at all of this, Cameron understands that, in the end, those who sow dishonesty reap destruction. And those who sow integrity reap respect. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.